Hello, this is Eastern Europe Review, the common project of BELSAT and TVP World, with reports and analysis from Belarus, Russia and Ukraine. I am Sergei Belsa, and these are the stories. Drones attempt an attack on the Kremlin. Who is it convenient for, and what is the purpose of such an operation?
This shows that the Russian government is not capable of protecting itself.
The Russian Women's Guard has been formed in the Urals. Its members are ready to go to war against Ukraine.
Patriotism starts pouring out of you and you think, what else could you do to be useful to our guys at the front, to the country?
Belarusian dictator Lukashenka pretends not to get involved in the war. Meanwhile, there are grounds to accuse him of genocide.
The mass crimes of the Belarusian dictator are so well known to everyone, from Italy to Portugal, that he won't be able to remain in the shadow of the crimes committed by Putin.
2 drones have attacked the Senate Palace in Moscow. This building is a working residence of Russian President Vladimir Putin, and although he himself was not there at the time, the Kremlin press service has called the incident an assassination attempt on the leader of Russia. The event has given rise to many theories about who might be behind the attack: offended oligarchs, internal resistance, the work of Ukrainian sabotage groups in Russia, or was it the Kremlin itself that staged the attack to achieve political goals? And should Ukraine be expecting a terrible revenge from Russia as a consequence? We'll tell you in the next story.
On the night of May the 3rd, at about 2 a.m., this footage showing the Kremlin being attacked by a drone appeared on the Telegram channel of residents of the Central District of Moscow. Only 12 hours later, the news of the explosion began to spread in the Russian media, and then a statement appeared on the Kremlin website.
We regard these actions as a planned terrorist attack and an attempt on the president carried out on the eve of Victory Day, the May the 9th parade. As a result of this terrorist attack, the president was not injured. The schedule of his work has not changed. It continues as usual.
Following the Kremlin, reports of the attack were picked up by the representatives of Russian authorities and propagandists. A terrorist attack against the president is an attack on Russia. Speaker of the State Duma Vyacheslav Volodin wrote in his Telegram channel, "A real full-scale war is being waged against our country," said Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov. "Maybe now the war will start for real," asks the head of the RT holding, Margarita Simonian. In Kiev, Moscow's statements were called forcing the situation before May the 9th. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky declared that Kiev was not involved in the incident.
We don't attack Putin or Moscow. We fight on our territory. We are defending our villages and cities. We don't have, enough weapons for this. That's why we don't use it anywhere. For us, that is the deficit. We can't spend it. And we didn't attack Putin. We leave it to tribunal.
It is very unlikely for a drone from Ukraine to fly more than 1,000 kilometers, pass through all the protective barriers, and avoid detection by military radar, and precisely hit the dome of the presidential palace. But according to analysts at the American Institute for the Study of War, Russia could have staged an attack on the Kremlin itself, all in order to show the population that the war is close and everyone should participate in it, analysts say. But Russian experts call this version extremely unlikely.
You have to understand nothing at all about Russian politics and what a sacred role the symbols of power play in it. The drone was aimed at the presidential standard. This is one of the symbols of power. If you blow up, or try to blow up, your own symbol of power, then who will believe you later? This shows that the Russian government is not capable of protecting itself. That's all.
Despite the fact that Putin was not injured and Kiev declared its innocence, Russian propagandists are out for blood. We asked a Ukrainian political scientist whether it is necessary to be afraid of revenge on Kiev from Russia.
Russia has already done everything it could, in fact. Any statements, any justifications are only an excuse, but not a reason to escalate the situation. Of course, there is a certain margin of escalation. For example, some kind of symmetrical strike on a particular decision-making center.
Can the Kremlin use the last resort in its arsenal, nuclear weapons? We asked the military political observer, Yuri Fyodorov.
When it comes to Putin and the Kremlin, everything is possible. But I think that Putin is unlikely to dare to use tactical nuclear weapons against Ukraine. This is because the retaliatory measures from the West against Russia, including military ones, will be crushing. Putin knows this very well. But to escalate the situation and escalate tension, yes, this is in the interests of today's Russia.
Regardless of whoever is behind the attack on the Kremlin, it is a clear escalation of the ongoing war, and nothing good should be expected from this.
Russian women who support the war have created the so-called Women's Guard of the Urals in Yekaterinburg. This association trains women in hand-to-hand combat and shooting. The most important thing for trainers is to instill an unconditional belief in the justness of armed aggression against Ukraine. Members of the paramilitary movement say that they are ready to give their lives for Putin. And the women of the Urals are not alone in their desire to promote the war.
This is the Urals, the center of Russia. Yekaterinburg is the fourth largest city in the country in terms of population and territory. Local resident Olga Smetanina hurries to the gym in the evening, but not for a fitness workout as it used to be. Olga is a leader of the so-called Women's Guard of the Urals. She and other instructors teach hand-to-hand combat and boxing to fellow females of different ages, and after physical training, there's shooting practice using different kinds of weapons.
The most important thing is to develop and lift the patriotic spirit of the population, the citizens of Russia. This is to show an example of those men who fled from mobilization in their time to Kazakhstan.
The idea of creating such courses came to the Ural women's minds when the Russian army began to suffer setbacks in the war with Ukraine. Even the masses of Russian men who were mobilized by Vladimir Putin and sent to the occupied territories didn't change the situation. At that time, the paramilitary participants say patriotism overcame them.
A state of mind is forming in your soul. Patriotism starts pouring out of you and you think, what else could you do to be useful to our guys at the front, to the country?
Olga Gavrikova, a resident of Yekaterinburg, admits that she had never been interested in what was happening in Ukraine before, but last autumn her husband volunteered for the war and she joined the Women's Guard. While her hitting technique might not yet be so good, nevertheless her ideology now is completely normal.
It seemed to me that it would never touch me, but when it did touch my family, I accepted my husband's point of view, so I am a patriot of my country.
Everyone in this room says that if necessary, they are ready to take up arms and go to the front in Ukraine. But in the meantime, they are creating a children's branch of the movement called Generation Z to put ideas of militarism into their kids' heads from a young age. The letter Z became one of the symbols of Russia's war in Ukraine. Khabarovsk is located in the Russian Far East. This is one of the largest centers of this remote region situated far away from Moscow. Local businesswoman Yelena Dmitrieva thought that given the situation nowadays, war should be present in the life of the country's inhabitants from birth. Her son-in-law is at war and her daughter recently gave birth. When her daughter was discharged from the maternity hospital, she sewed a camouflage baby blanket for her grandson and later decided to set up industrial production of them.
People looked at me like I'm inadequate. It was impossible. And I realized, yes, it is possible. And when we were being discharged from the maternity hospital, the nurses were very surprised and they liked it so much.
However, even the audience of the local TV channel was shocked by this baby wear.
Crazy. This woman is crazy. Are there any more crazy mothers like this? Crazy people who dress their children in military uniforms. Why don't they understand that in the future there will certainly be wounds, mutilations, severed limbs, mangled fates, and graves?
But Yelena's business is booming. She says she already has hundreds of orders for such blankets, mostly from military wives. But some of those fathers will never see their newborn children. According to the latest data from Russian independent journalists, the number of Russian military confirmed dead in Ukraine exceeds 20,000, while foreign intelligence agencies speak about nearly 200,000 dead and wounded. The Russian Defense Ministry hasn't published official figures since last September.
No matter how hard Alexander Lukashenko pretends that he is not involved in Russia's military aggression against Ukraine, his situation is deteriorating. Now he is not just an accomplice in war, but also an accomplice in genocide. According to Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, the Belarusian dictator is responsible for the forcible removal of Ukrainian children to the territory of Belarus. Officials in Minsk are outraged by the resolution which threatens Lukashenko with an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court. Then the Belarusian dictator will be able to explain in the dock that he actually stands for peace.
The first document where the term genocide describes Russia's actions, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe adopted a resolution condemning the forcible removal of children and other civilians from Ukraine. The signs of genocide were seen in the illegal abduction and deportation of Ukrainian children. At first, it was about Russia and Putin, but eventually the document was adopted with a mention of Belarus and Lukashenko as an accomplice in the crime. Deputy of the Verkhovna Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine, Alexei Honcharenko, had proposed adding the Belarusian dictator to the resolution.
In the report, there is mentioning that unfortunately, not only to Russian Federation, there is a forceful deportation of children, but also to Belarus. And it means that when we are saying about those who are responsible, about those against whom International Criminal Court should work, about whom the warrants should be issued, it's not just Putin, but also self-proclaimed so-called president of Belarus, Lukashenko, in reality Putin's puppet.
With his public speeches, Alexander Lukashenko tries to assert that he actually stands for peace and he is out of the picture in the war. But his words obviously don't sound convincing. The amendment proposed by Alexei Honcharenko was unanimously approved.
I haven't seen such a thing in the hall for a long time. The entire range of politicians voted unanimously about Lukashenko. The mass crimes of the Belarusian dictator are so well known to everyone, from Italy to Portugal, that he won't be able to remain in the shadow of the crimes committed by Putin.
The Belarusian Council of the Republic, in turn, condemned the PACE resolution and the mention of Belarus in it, saying that European politicians are hostages of a game of censorship and dirty propaganda in relation to the events in Ukraine. And the removal of children from the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine to the territory of Belarus is in fact a humanitarian mission to rescue the civilian population. Soon after the PACE resolution, a report of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe was published, in which the deportation of children from Ukraine, including to Belarus, is recognized as a war crime. This resolution won't change Lukashenko's image, because it's already very negative. But such documents won't allow Lukashenko to turn the page and try to get rid of this negative image. Russia's and Belarus's actions in this case fall under the concept of cultural genocide, that is, the forcible transfer of children from one human group to another for the purpose of assimilation. Children move to another cultural and ethnic environment and stop associating themselves with their previous human group. Accordingly, they become part of another group, and as they are excluded from the previous one, it is completely or partially destroyed. Belarusian propaganda reports that children from the Donbass come to Belarus voluntarily and actually for rehabilitation to the camp Dubrava. A Paralympic athlete and supporter of Lukashenko, Alexei Talai, may be involved in the abduction of Ukrainian children. His foundation is linked to the organization of so-called rehabilitation. According to the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, there are more than 1,000 Ukrainian children on the territory of Belarus.
These are all our stories. Thank you for watching Eastern Europe Review. My name is Sergei Peresa and it was a pleasure to spend these 15 minutes with you. Please stay with TVP World and stand with Ukraine.